Let me ask you, let's talk Turkey, okay? Because
Sure.
last time you were on, when we did our lengthy interview in August of 21, we talked about your traumatic brain injury and some
Hmm.
of the trauma that you suffered in serving overseas, and that doesn't make anybody inclined to abuse a loved one at all, to be clear. But it can result in anger issues, having PTSD or something like that. Traumatic brain injury can change the way somebody acts or behaves, and so is it not true? Like none of this is true that you were rageful toward her, you threw chairs toward her, dropped her off on the interstate. She says Interstate 79 when she was 6 months pregnant. That's very clear. Like that's a super detailed one. None of that ever happened.
No, no, none of it.
She just
I
made all
mean,
this up to get you.
y- yes, yes. In fact, I would say that in some cases, the family court or being in the system almost incentivizes that because you have one parent or another feels like they have to make up allegations to get a leg up in custody. And then you add to that whoever gets primary custody, there's a financial incentive there because child support obligations and sometimes alimony is increased. And then add to that the fact that there's no punishment for false allegations. It almost the entire system that pits one parent against the other. I mean, it creates an environment for it.
Mm.
And look, Lori and I, we had a rough relationship, right? Maybe rough is obviously the wrong word. It wasn't a great, healthy relationship. Um, that's why she and I went our separate ways and ended up getting divorced. There was never any abuse. I mean, we fought, we had arguments, we called each other names. We had an on again, off again relationship for a long time, but there was never any abuse in that relationship. Certainly nothing of what she said in that trial was true, but unfortunately, the judge was swayed by those allegations, even though he didn't find any child abuse
Well,
in
and I'm
his
going to get to
opinion.
that. So, as you point out, back at that 2018 hearing in which she raised these allegations, she got the temporary protection order, which I mean, with respect to her, that's very easy to get. You just go in one-sided before a court and say, I need it. And they take your assertions as they basically give you the benefit of the doubt. And if your assertions taken as true would justify you to the protection, they generally give it. But then you
Hmm.
have a trial, then you have a hearing where the judge hears evidence from the defendant and gets to make a more measured conclusion. And indeed, even this judge acknowledged that after a full hearing on that 2018 trial, the judge denied her petition for protection, and that after that, you agreed, the both of you, to a 50-50 custody order. You filed a motion to expunge that case, basically erase it, which she did not oppose, and the court did expunge it. So, so far going into your Senate race and all that, you and Lori had an ugly divorce, an ugly custody dispute, but you got it to a decent place and you're going forward. Now it gets reopened because she's saying it's not working. We hate each other too much to communicate well, and the judge is revisiting. And now there's a couple of other allegations. These are, arguably the most disturbing about you and your children that I do want to ask you about because they're in the public record now. And she said that in January or February of 2018, and you'll tell me whether this was also in the earlier proceeding, but that in January or February 2013, she claims she heard your older son scream and cry, that you said, oh, it's a joke, and that she saw your full handprint on the child's back, that the child was hurt, and she took a picture that was admitted into evidence. She claims she was going to call the police, but she did not because she knew that you were concerned about your livelihood and public image as an author and a public speaker, and because she did not see you hit the child, and that you would allegedly say to her, quote, call the cops and you will be dead before they get here, and then claimed you were only joking. Before I go on to the next incident, do you want to respond to that one?
It's completely not true. And that picture that was entered into evidence during the custody trial, that exact same picture was entered into evidence during the 2018 hearing. And my testimony during the custody trial in 2021 was the same as it was during 2018, and
But
that's
she did
not
raise
a
that
pic.
one earlier. That was also raised before the judge did not find in her favor and she
Correct.
to 50-50 custody.
It was the same piece of evidence and the same alleged incident. And my testimony was unchanged, and that's not a picture of my son.
It's
That
not a picture
incident,
of your son.
not a picture of my son, and it just flat out did not happen. And,
Did she
you know,
falsify evidence? Is that your allegation?
I don't know what she did. You'd have to ask her that question. But that picture was not a picture of my son. That incident did not happen. And my son, my children never testified to that.
Wow. All right, let me give you an incident number 2, and this is, the court writing this up. This is the court again that Senior Judge James G. Arner says that the next incident appears to have been the final straw. A few months later, Lori claims Sean and the younger son, 5 years old at the time, were playing with a robe tie in the parents' bedroom, and that Parnell, meaning you, punched a closet door and it hit the child in the face. He said to the child, quote, "It was your fault and get out of here," end quote. Photos of the child's face showing marks were introduced. Lori told Sean to get his stuff and leave. He left that day. Several days later, he came back to the house screaming. She said she was going to file for protection and so on. So that preceded, that's according to this court, is what led her to go in and get that initial protection order, which wound up ultimately in 50-50 custody.
This incident was also discussed at the 2018 hearing. And anytime there's a PFA, it also triggers a CYS, Child and Youth Services investigation. And so they also investigated this. Evan and I were playing tug of war. My youngest son and I were playing tug of war with a robe, like one of those things that wrap around. He was just super little at the time, but I was pulling on one end, he was pulling on the other, and he let go of his end and went back and he bumped his head on the corner of a door. And that's exactly what happened. And back then, I think 4 years ago, that's exactly what he told the investigator. And that allegation as well was unfounded. But again, it was dismissed back in 2018, but then brought to bear again in the 2021 custody trial. Everything was dismissed, and I
Wow.
thought this was all behind us and that we were moving on together and doing everything that we could to raise our kids. Look, anytime there's a divorce or a divorcing couple or a couple that's separated, there's going to be some conflict. And there is some conflict, but the children, by and large, like are not necessarily exposed to it. You know, of course they know that their parents are divorced, and of course they know that there's some conflict, but they weren't exposed to it. Um, they weren't exposed to it in a way in which it was presented at the custody trial. And after these allegations were dismissed, I thought that this was just going to be put behind us, and that, you know, Lori and I were going to move on in a productive co-parenting relationship and do everything that we could to raise good, strong kids together, but apart.